I been living around this morning through rain. Hidden pain, hidden tears. Had to keep them locked away. I done shed so many tears. Heal my heart, save my soul. I bury my heart anew. Devil working on my soul, but I'm so blessed. Leave it up to God, so right now I just worry less. Yeah. Heal my heart, save my soul.
Kato, you way too dumb, kid.
The pain from my past.
Your name and where you from?
Tyrone Ferrell, and I'm from Fort Myers, Florida. I lived in Jacksonville and now live here in Palm Coast.
So tell me about family life growing up.
Family life growing up for me involved, as a matter of fact, just as a young kid, I remember as I was growing up, I was always in church with my grandmother, and I think by the time I reached about 5 or 6, that's when I got exposed to what I would call just a lot of violence. I seen a lot of violence within my own family, and my mother went to prison when I was like 6 years old.
What happened? Why did she have to go to prison?
She was at a bar, and a guy was kind of groping her or whatever, and her response to him was, I guess, no, but in the process of it, it put her in kind of a compromised position, I guess, and he was on top of her, so she got her hands on a gun and unloaded it on him, and my mother was taken away.
How long did she spend in jail?
I think 4.5 years.
Who did you live with while she was away?
My aunt Betty.
And how did transitioning and growing up with your aunt different from growing up with your mom?
From growing up with my mom was more like we had a set structure as it related to having father, mother, all of us in the house. They worked jobs like they did, but once I moved from out of that environment, my grandmother, in a sense, was to me our spiritual foundation. My mother and my father, they kind of were still living their lives trying to figure it out. But once we got with my aunt also had a church background, her husband as well, and my cousins and all of us. But the only thing is that there was a disparage as it related to the amount of monies and things that we had versus what they had. And never to villainize or put a negative on my aunt or anything like that. But imagine if you inherit 2 extra children, and already have 4 or 5 in your own household. So it just pulls on those resources.
So where was your father?
Actually, that's amazing. Just last year in October, I found out who my actual father was. So I'm just now, I had did a DNA and found out that my father, who I thought was my father, was not my father. But at the time, my stepfather that's my father. That would still be my father right now if I had to express that, because he was there.
So where was he when your mother was taken away?
He would come like on maybe every second or third weekend and come through and maybe give us some money, spend just maybe an hour or so, and then kind of, and that's the way it went until she got out.
So how things worked out when she got out?
When she got out, that was amazing because we had a number of Christmases that we didn't get to have much, if anything, And so when she came home, they were driving one of those Delta 88s, one of the big boat type cars, man, and they had a hitch on it with the U-Haul, and the U-Haul was man, it was amazing because the little U-Haul that they had hooked up to it, it was filled all the way up from front to back with toys. And that was, matter of fact, she came home right around Christmas, and it was so amazing to end up experiencing that. So that was one of the best Christmases I could ever say that I had. you know.
So where'd you get the toys?
She was in a work release program, and the people in whom she worked at a Waffle House, and as a waitress there, in the region that she was in was a Lowell women's prison, but in that area, she worked as a waitress, and because of it, the wrestlers, Terry Funk and Andre the Giant and all those guys, those were the influencers who actually tipped her so well to where she saved up mounds of money, and she did well in that way, because by the time she was released, we moved into a really large house, beautiful house, maybe 4-bedroom house, and it was just really good. So
how was life for you then?
for us then, man, it was awesome. I mean, because after she got out, pretty much the house that we moved into, as a matter of fact, man, you got to think, even in the mid 70s, that time, me and my brother, it was a big oak tree out there by that house, and I never forget that big oak tree. When we would go out and clean up the leaves, every weekend we would do that, and they would give us $25. Then, in 75, in like 75, that was a lot of money for us. So we were able to go and do what we wanted to do, but it also gave birth to entrepreneurial pursuits for us, because they gave us a foundation of work. They told us that you got to work for what you get. I remember, never forget, my dad, my stepdad, he would always tell us, he said, listen, he said, I'm behind you and I'm going to support you. He said, but one thing, if you go to jail for stealing or for selling drugs, he said, I'm not coming. So.
So what kind of kid were you in high school?
Actually, a pretty good kid, man. Only thing, man, I was such a class act sometimes where I was just really hyper. And, it could be, where one of my sons, I remember he told me, said that they diagnosed him with ADD or whatever. So I believe I was one of those kids that just had a lot going on in my mind or whatever. But overall, I was a good kid. I socialized with every and anybody. I didn't have any issues or problems like that. Every now and then I ran into bully problems. And when I ran into bully problems, bullies did not know my background. And because they didn't know my background, I didn't see anything of what I actually experienced as a kid, then, they kind of looked at it like maybe I would just be somebody they could just kind of mow down or run over, when in all actuality, I had a fight deep down inside of me that was willing to go to whatever length to make sure that I survived.
Why do you think that fight needed to come out so much at such a young age?
Well, I think number one, I remember, like I said, I saw where after my mother committed the murder, and I had aunts and uncles who were just violent by nature. They were. I remember one summer, man, my uncle shot, I think, 7 or 8 people in one summer, and didn't do any jail time, anything behind it, So I'm like, wow, and I even saw where one time my uncles got into it, and they were shooting at each other and shot my grandmother, who was a praying woman, So I'm like, whoa, So that was, for us, that was like sacrilege for them to actually do that at her house, and that happened. But in that, it was always about being able to hold your own. And that was something that they told us and that they taught us. And so never forget, once my mother went to prison, I went to these projects where I was staying with my aunt. While staying there, there was a man in that project complex that went around offering toys to children. Those toys that he was offering, it was actually a bait or a lure. And I got raped and molested at, like 6, maybe 7 years old. And I vowed that once I got big enough and old enough that I would get revenge and I would kill him.
So tell me about when you got molested. Like, how did it happen? Like, what exactly did he tell you? And can you remember the details of that?
I can. Yeah, fresh, actually, in my mind. But, it was sort of like, it was a group of us kids that were out playing, and everybody else kind of had toys. We didn't. So we got creative, whether it was a stick and a rock, and that's what we were using to play baseball. That's what we did, and I believe more than ever that he had to be a great observer because he was watching apparently, and he used that and he said, "Well, I got all the toys you could think of, and that's kind of how he eased up." I was always a kid that kind of received anybody. I didn't have a suspicious nature. Not at that time, I didn't. And because of it, I think I was most vulnerable.
Can you tell me the details on like how it started? Like where were you?
Yeah. First he came and he offered. I think it was, if I'm correct, it was a bat and ball, and a cap gun. And from there, it moved from that to saying, I got a whole lot more, but I can't bring them all out. And so that's what he used as the means to say, well, I got a whole bunch more, but you got to come to where I am. And once that happened, pretty much what he said, he did have. He had a house full of toys.
So how long did that last?
For me, I can honestly say it was three experiences that I remember vividly.
Why didn't you tell your family about it? Like what was your mindset then?
Well, the thing is he was very meticulous in grooming as well. So he knew, well, if you tell anybody, then you won't be able to come back and play with the toys. But in that, the first time, it was all about, I think more or less, an introduction. After the introduction, then that's what led into him then, leading me into a room. But I never forget, I had a cousin also that on one of those occasions went with me. And both of us went through that harrowing experience of being molested.
So did you know something was wrong? Did you think that was normal? Tell me your mindset when you're going through this process.
Well, I definitely felt like it was wrong, that it was violative, and no matter how much I said no or how much I tried to resist or fight, he was definitely much stronger than me, much larger than me. But at the same time, at that point, I knew that was the end of my journey. He would never get me back in there. That was at least the thought. The two experiences I had before actually being molested that time was pretty much about him just trying to take the defenses down, to weaken you and have you to where you'd actually go for it, and I think once that happened, I mean, for me, pretty much, I was traumatized, and one side of me was more ashamed of what took place, and the other side was it wasn't so much about the toys anymore for me. I didn't care. I didn't need to have those toys if that's what I gotta experience or endure. So I think the thing is that I was more upset. I was more angry. I felt violated, and then along with it, one of my uncles, I remember, he made a statement, and the statement that he made, by then my mom was free, and he said that boy ain't gonna be nothing but a little sissy. And when he stated it, I immediately, even I might have been, maybe 10 or 11, whatever, but I all but tried to, run up on him, tried to fight him, and my mom like, well, you have you lost your mind or what? I'm like, no, I say, he can't say that, about me, that I'm that, because for us and what we understood about, quote, being a sissy meant that you were a homosexual man. And because of it, I wasn't accepting that. I wasn't accepting that title. And so I fought really hard to make sure that I defended that part. And sometimes even in my own personal interpretation, sometimes I actually call it like I had a Napoleon complex, even though I was taller. I was just as tall as everybody around me, but had a small man mindset that had to defend himself. And so I tried to defend myself on every front. If anybody came at me in a way that was violative, or you felt like you came too far into my space, then I would try and defend myself.
So what happened to the bullies who tried to bully you?
They incurred violence with me. One young man I remember, all through in our neighborhood, it's called the Michigan Projects, and they recently tore those down in Fort Myers. But in those projects, the one thing about that neighborhood was you had to fight. Period. Just no matter whether it was one cut away or one block away, you had to fight. So if you went too far away from home, you already know that you're in for it. Most likely, if you encounter certain guys, it was just about the fight. But for me, it wasn't that I was ever afraid. Matter of fact, one of my oldest brother, one of my brothers, he specifically told me, he said, "Man, you're a little too bold. You ain't big enough to be standing up to people that's this big." I'm like, well, I ain't gonna let nobody run over me. And so it was always about the fight. So I had a fighting mentality, I believe, even though at the same time I'm a gentle, loving person, can communicate with anybody, but it was always when I knew that it was somebody who would cross those lines to, in a sense, insult you, violate you, things like that, then I was always willing to respond to it.
You said one of your uncles shot about 8 people in one summer.
Mm-hmm.
What was the atmosphere like in the community? Like how does someone get away with something like that back then?
Back then, I think there was a. It's like when you look at the modern day Western, and you notice that even though they have a sheriff, but there was just certain things that men still could do a standoff right across from each other and just open up on each other, and that's what was happening, literally. And I saw it with my own eyes. I remember one day he had a business where he was not a business per se, but on the weekends that was one of his hustles that he would take, and he would buy slabs of ribs and he would cook them right on the side of a nightclub. And when he cooked those ribs, people would come up and buy sandwiches or buy whole slabs of ribs from him. And one guy came up that one of those days, and when he came up, he reached on the grill and grabbed a whole slab and said, "I'm taking these." I won't say specifically what he said, but he said, "I'm taking these." And he called him a little man. And it was the little that stuck out to me. And my uncle said, "Oh, you taking them, huh?" And he was real calm about it. So I was like, this is weird. Nah, he'd be fighting me if he took my ribs. So I just watched. And my observation is that after he took the ribs and he pulled one, broke it off, and started eating it and walking away, my uncle immediately reached in his pocket, man, and the first place he shot him was in his rear, in his butt, and then shot him a few more times, and he was hollering, and he was like, "No, you wasn't hollering when you was taking my ribs," and and so, matter of fact, even in our family history, I found out that my granddad, he was a mechanic, and the guy, he fixed several people's cars, and they apparently had extra keys, so they tried to come back and take the car at an hour that they thought that he wasn't up. But Granddad was a crack shot. He was really a marksman when it come to shooting guns, and he killed 3 men. And so it was never one of those things to where none of us didn't know what to do if you had a situation. So Granddad was really a pretty rough and kind of mean guy in a sense. And I think that it just transferred right into the line of our uncles, my mom, my aunt, and that's what I seen it firsthand all the time. I remember one neighbor's dog ran out and bit my aunt and tore her pants, but she always had this thing about sending everything to the cleaners and heavy starch, so the pants looked like they could stand up on their own, because she's always just that neat and pristine about what she wore. But her nickname was Honey West. I never forget that, Honey West. And they called her Honey West because she carried a gun, but not just any gun, but a very large gun. And she shot the neighbor's dog and killed him, and that was always her story, that anybody that violated her, she's gonna shoot you or stab you or whichever means she had to take. So, for us, I think the more and more I saw it, it's sort of like now they got these games out called, what is that? It's a game, they call it, it's a video game where these young people they can snatch people out of the car, shoot them, and do violence.
Grand Theft Auto.
There we go. Grand Theft Auto, man. And when I'm like, whoa, so the more and more I actually watch that action, I'm like, it's so easy to desensitize someone to where they, when you look at now the war that's going on in Ukraine and bodies that are laying all on the streets, what do you see? What are you experiencing? You're actually getting to the place to where now that's becoming a normal. That's not normal to see that, and it wasn't normal for me to be seeing what I saw, but I was able to process the information, and then when I got in a situation, I would use that part of my life and experience to be able to survive it, because I always looked at it like I was surviving, not like I was actually a part of anything. I always looked at myself like I was surviving, even though, I can clearly see that, wasn't necessarily right. So
what did you do after high school?
After high school, I think immediately upon graduating, I was going down to Miami at Florida Memorial College. I had offers and scholarship offers to Michigan State, to the Citadel, even had a minority offer to West Point, and also Princeton, on academic and athletic scholarships. And I thought for sure, I would end up being able to get a degree as a doctor, and that was my aim and my goal. I remember going to Miami, and Miami wound up having great influence there, and it had an impact on me. So on the weekends I would come back home, but the more I came back home, the streets would call to me, or guys in the streets, they knew that I was a pretty fast runner, and because of it, they offered me $600-700, just to hold something for them, saying if the police come, run. So it was easy money, I thought. The more and more I got to where the interest in school was less, and through that one weekend I went back to school. I had some tests and some interns that I had some things that I had to do. And in doing that, somebody called me and said a guy robbed my mom. And when I heard that, I dropped everything, came back home. I found the guy independently without anybody telling me where he was or whatever, and I shot him.
Did you know you were going to shoot him?
I think I knew that I was going to encounter him. I was going to fight him. That was the original thought. But sort of like, I think there's a switch. And when that switch clicks, then you're just not you. You know.
So do you think if you found him a month later, you would have done less to him, or you felt like once that switch is on, you're going to be at that level and until you're fulfilled with revenge?
Yeah, I think the second, the latter, because once I've, one thing I can say consistently about me personally that I found to be true is that once I've been moved in that way, then usually I don't back off until I got an understanding of it, and so then to me it was more about what he did to my mom.
So how did you feel right after you shot him? Did you feel like you made a mistake, right? Or you just felt like, hey, I just need to just get out of here, and then that was that?
I did feel like I messed up. Like I don't have any chance of possibly being able to fulfill this other goal I just left from. And the more and more that was on me, it's like my other family members said, Tyrone, just go back to school. Go back to school. Don't worry about it, whatever. And sure enough, police never came. I never got charged, not knowing that would lead to me understanding that it can happen again and I can get away with it again. And I think more and more, it's sort of like you start getting more calloused, like the scriptures say, the hearts have waxed cold. And I knew that I started waxing cold in the sense of if somebody violated me or violated somebody in my family, that I was willing to go to whatever degree to protect them. So
After that, how did your attitude change on the streets? Did you become more bold in whatever it is that you're part of, or you did less of it?
yeah, I was actually way. Like I say, I've always been a pretty personable, humble person with anybody, and it was only when somebody kind of came in more of a bully complex that triggered it. And when that happened, that's what would kind of ignite it. Once it got ignited, then, then I really wasn't very good, in being able to control. But even though, it seemed like to me, I felt like I had a great degree of control as it related to my emotions. If I was switched out on, or what we would call betrayed by someone, then what I did is I just cut that relationship off. I just didn't deal with them anymore. And that was my way of dealing with it, because why go back into alliance then knowing that most likely gonna bite you again? And that was kind of how I lived. But trying to process that now, even where my life is now as a pastor, is challenging. Because
Did you continue in the same path? How did that change your life moving forward?
moving forward, what I found out is that after running drugs and doing different things, it really heightened my level of awareness concerning it. But the change that I was looking for, because like my wife, who was my girlfriend back then, I remember having conversations with her as a friend, and she was like, Tyrone, you ought to do what you really desire to do. Why don't you get in church? Sounds like that's where you'd rather be than in the streets. So why don't you, pursue that? I'm like, yeah, but, how do I actually get on my feet? Even though I came from a working family, working background, so we always worked. But I don't think I wrestled too much with that decision. And as I was getting ready to make decisions to make the changes, it looked like the opportunities just magnified, like they came in an exponential way.
Opportunities like what?
To make tens of thousands of dollars in a matter of days.
Doing what exactly?
Selling drugs.
How long did you end up selling drugs for?
I ended up doing that for a few years.
And what was it like? Did you find fulfillment? Like, how did you feel, during the height of you selling drugs?
In the height of me selling drugs, I think my convictions were definitely different from the other men around me. Because, I'd take monies and try and figure out how to help families that didn't either have their lights, didn't have water, didn't have food. I still would do that, but still, and I definitely wouldn't sell any drugs to a pregnant woman or stuff like that. But, I think the thing that kind of had me locked in, because there was one side of me that wanted to do good, and there was another side of me that always seemed to be experiencing a push or violence, where guys would come up and want to rob you. And after they rob you, then after they've taken everything you got, then, when they see you again, they're still firing shots at you. And so, of course, it just led to me just responding. And in the responses, I got shot, like I said, shot several guys. So it didn't balance out for a while. It took a while before I actually got away from it.
Did you feel like you had a target on your back?
No, every day I had a level of paranoia also that seemed to be exponential compared to everybody around me. Because I told them, I used to ask the question, I say, man, well, why would you sell drugs knowing the kind of time you're facing and not take it more seriously? So, I did things that were way, way unconventional, because,
Unconventional, like what?
in other words, when guys were sleeping, that's when I would knock on guys' doors that I knew who would buy from me. I would never let them walk up on me in the streets to get anything from me there. So that way I knew I was always held, in a sense, I could always identify specific individuals that I did do anything with. And because of it, it kind of preserved me. But older men used to always tell me, don't spend a lot of money on flash and bang, but make sure that you actually have some money for a lawyer, for bond. Treat yourself good, but don't do it to extremes to where you're gonna have to end up finding yourself stuck and just no help whatsoever. So it was kind of like a security blanket for me in that sense.
So did you take the advice? Did you have a security blanket?
I did. I was really doing things. I thought I was doing them pretty wise, but no matter how wise we may appear to be, somebody's always thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead of what you're doing. And for me, I think at some point I realized that I was accumulating a lot of money, put my mom in compromised positions. My mom at one point, she was like, "No, you can't come in my house. I know what I've heard what you've been doing, but I would show up and maybe pay the mortgage, show up and give her some spending money or whatever, until I per se weakened her." And so for me personally, I felt like that was me being manipulative towards the love that she had for me as her child. Maternal love is different. And I can definitely see that it's different, how that, we can manipulate our parents. And because of it, I knew that I needed to get that straight. I definitely didn't want to involve anybody, or so I tried to keep everybody out of the knowledge of knowing what I was doing. But, when every time you're showing up and you got bags, Publix bags full of at least $100,000 to $150,000 of cash money that you're giving to your girlfriends, leaving some at this house or that house, eventually, by now you're definitely in a state of paranoia, and you got to do something to change the way things are.
So what was the best month like for you? What would you say is the most amount of money you made, at any given time?
One day, I remember one day I made close to, I think $190,000 in one day.
Where exactly were you in the structure of on how you made your money?
Well, what I did at first, I used to hustle for other guys. And they would just bring me large amounts. But in that, I then figured, I said, hey man, this is too big of a risk to be taken for them to give us these small amounts of money. And that's when I made a decision that I would go to Miami for myself, find a supplier, vendor, and then change the game for myself. And I remember one time a guy, he left me enough stuff where he gave me enough time to, by the time he got back to me to collect the money, I had already went to Miami 2 or 3 times. And I had all of his money, and I had made his money, and I had all of my money. And from there, pretty much, I didn't have to deal with that. But I would take so much from those guys and use it to employ other guys. And thanks be to God. I mean, really, these guys at one particular area to where we were hustling, we actually found ourselves where they didn't want me there. Like they were saying I wasn't from their particular area, so you ain't permitted here. But during that time that they said I ain't permitted here, we fought, we went through it. I left there that day, and that day the feds apparently had come through and was taking pictures from a school and took pictures of everybody but me because they told me I needed to leave.
How did you end up finding that out?
Found it out through the indictment because they picked up like 15, 20 guys, and they're like, Tyrone, they didn't come and get you. Why? And we were wondering why, not knowing that I wasn't on the street the day that they were doing the filming.
Did you end up spending time in jail or having to deal with law enforcement at any point?
Yeah. Matter of fact, that same street, I was coming on that street one day. Officers just set up a stop, and they set it up illegally. And because they set it up illegally, they actually caught me with well over about $10,000 worth of crack. But I had to. Of course, I got arrested and arraigned. Once I got arraigned, I got bonded out, and from there, pretty much once they took me through the process, I was able to go to court, and they basically throw it out on technicality. So that's how I won then. But then, I realized then about legality and technicalities through that. And it just helped me to know that, no, you got to do this different. You got to be a little more saner about it. So, pretty much I got saved. Like I said, through that, I got popped a couple of times. And in those times that I got stopped or, officers took money from me a lot of times, huge amounts of money, no drugs. So it's one of those things where you couldn't argue the point about it. All you could do is either get back up, start over again, or do something different, not knowing that one day that I'd end up in the situation that I really ended up. The bigger situation was one time returning from Miami. It was a trooper that stopped us, and that led to a huge seizure. They called it one of the largest seizures in Southwest Florida. And that was they called it $7-8 million worth of what they thought to be cocaine, and it wound up being heroin because it was white. It's one of the most potent of heroines that's produced, and so the feds came in, changed my bond from like $330,000 Next thing you know, I went to no bond, and then federal magistrate gave me a bond of like $3.5 million. And I faced 40 to life on 4 counts.
Tell me what the mindset is like, knowing that you're facing all this time. You have a bond so high. Like, what was the game plan then? Like, just walk me through it.
Okay. Well, once they gave me the indictment, I thought, okay, well, I was in the state. I was arrested in the state first, but then the state, they kept me for so many, I'm thinking maybe 30 days at 400,000. I think like 440,000. And then once the FDLE lab came back and proved that that was heroin instead of cocaine, the Fed stepped in. The DEA came and basically one morning they woke me up, told me, "You're being released, Ferrell," and they put me on my street clothes, and I got in between the doors that would let you out to the streets, only for them to open the doors, and a guy with a different badge rearrested me and told me I'd been indicted by the federal grand jury. And from there, that's when it started happening, that I realized that the bonds changed, everything changed, and then started finding out about the counts that they were bringing against me. And that's when it was like the reality of it really set in. Like, you're in a lot of trouble. I don't know how you're gonna get out of this or whatever. And from there, I pretty much ended up in 8x8 cell, pretty much for the majority of that time. I was in an 8x8 cell with a steel door, and they kept me isolated a lot. And through that isolation, I didn't know that, it might have been attacked. It may not have been, I don't know, but I had never actually faced any major time of any sort. So I didn't have a track record or anything else. But my co-defendant, on the other hand, he had already done like 15 calendar years in prison. So they looked at him like he was a career criminal, and I just wound up being in the wrong car at the wrong time, the wrong person. And they questioned me over and over again about where this stuff come from. I told the gentleman, I said, if I didn't know anything when I came here, I can't know anything now. And he's like, no, I ain't trying to make you, criminal, put yourself in a position where you convict yourself of something. I said, well, sir, all I'm saying is, if I didn't know anything, I can't know nothing now. And that's what I had to live with. And even when they made me an offer, the offer was 60 years, a 60-year deal versus 160. So for me, I'm like, well, I don't have no choice but to go to trial. But during that time, while in the 8x8 cell, they left me there, but they left me there with a Bible.
What do you go to sleep at night thinking about when you're facing 60 years? Did you think the best thing was to go to trial and see where it led, and that'll be your best opportunity to come out?
At first, that dawned on me, but then it's like, nah, you know what? No, it's just, nah. I mean, and the thing is what I did realize too, just from being in the streets and understanding that part, but there was an older gentleman that I was locked up with that did advise me that, hey, what you have to do is continue to say nothing. He said if they had something, they would show you some of what they have, so that at least it brings you to a place to where you have to make a decision, take a deal or whatever it is. And then also suggested, hey man, if you go ahead and tell on somebody, then you definitely would get released, but you probably do a little time. So, but telling on somebody was not on the table for me. I made up in my mind I was going to live with whatever I do wrong. I'll take that.
How much time did you actually spend locked up, by the way?
Actually, man, only about 9 months, 8 or 9 months. I asked because my attorney was a federal prosecutor for 15 years.
And that wasn't a state appointed?
Right. Yeah, that was state appointed. Yeah. So state appointed. So of course everybody's like, man, ain't no way you're gonna be able to win. I'm like, well, I said, that's what y'all say. I said, but I'm believing God. By then, my conversion is taking place behind that 8x8 in that 8x8 cell. I'm actually, everybody that was coming through the jail, I was praying for them. God was really giving me great insight, and along with it, I took the time to start reading the law. And as I started reading the law, I saw comparisons to what my case was. One older gentleman just told me, man, just keep your head in the books. Don't talk to anybody about anything that you're going through. And through that, I gained. I think God quickened my understanding to be able to respond to certain things. And in those responses, I remember I wrote a letter to the Supreme Court accusing the United States government of colluding with my lawyer, that they were trying to take my life. And the magistrate was like, this is a heavy accusation that you made against the U.S. government. I said, well, sir, I said, if it's a lie, I said, then my lawyer's standing right here. And my lawyer was like, what are you trying to do to me? I said, no, what are you trying to do to me?
And how did that play out?
That played out pretty well, actually, because, down at the bottom of the letter, I had on a carbon copy, and they were like, well, who else has this information? I said, a lot of organizations. And by letting that be known, then they were like, so, I said, so you don't know who's in the courtroom with us that's observing this? I said, but I don't plan on having my life taken from me. I said, listen, I ain't saying that I'm innocent, or I'm just so, that I'm some good schoolboy, like I have done nothing wrong. I said, that's not where I am. I said, but I need you to understand that I believe that I will genuinely be a great influence on our community at some point. He said, well, and he was like, well, I don't, how do you expect to get past all of this? And he said, well, if I find that the crimes right now that are stated, if they're true, then I'm gonna sentence you outside of the guidelines. I said, well, I look at you, and and so when I had a look on my face, and he was like, you seem like you got something you want to say. I said, well, ain't I innocent until proven guilty? He said, well, I already stated that. He said, but I'm telling you, I'm gonna sentence you outside of the guidelines. So I knew 40 to life times 4 indictments. The minimum was 40 on each one of the indictments. And so I, had expected then that I'm going to either get a life sentence or either I'm going to get free. It was one or the other. And through going through that ordeal, I was pretty calm, actually. I can't explain it. I established a good prayer life while I was there. And my prayer life led to me one night, I was praying for these guys as they was coming in the jail, and these different guys I was praying for, one of the guards saw it, and he said, he came to me later on that night. He said, man, you've encouraged so many people coming in here. He said, in the night, I want to encourage you. He said, I brought some food from home. He said, I'm going to give you my food. He said, I'm going to let you make some phone calls to whoever you want to make them to, or whatever. And I'll never forget, I called a pastor that used to always catch me on the streets, Pastor Watkins. He would walk up on me and say, just, Lord led me to pray for you tonight, son, or whatever. And so I would receive his prayers, and not knowing that one day, I remember he gave me his phone number, but his phone number, once he gave it to me, I had sort of like, I don't know, I know one thing, I remembered that number to the letter. I called him up. I told him that I read a passage of scripture that said, if any two or more is touching and agreeing, believing, ask anything in my name, I'll do it. And so when I read that, I received it. It was like, it was real. It was something that I knew that was gonna be instrumental in helping me get out and get free. And I called him. He said, he asked me, he said, so you serious, son, like that? I said, yes, sir. He said, so, we ain't gonna have to be coming behind you trying to get back in the church. Well, I said, no, sir. I said, it ain't about that. I said, no. I say, I believe I have a genuine relationship with God established. I said, so if you'll just do me the favor of coming and touching and agreeing, like the scriptures say, I believe I'm gonna get free. He came, he touched and agreed with me. And when we got through praying, the guards left me in there a few hours over. Didn't let me eat dinner or nothing that night. But that morning, after he left, about 4:30, the guards came and got me up. Said, come on, you going to court this morning. I'm like, but this is unannounced. And just happened to be that when they took me to court, they took me by an Italian sub shop, and I ate a huge Philly cheese steak sub or whatever, and hadn't ate no food off the streets and all that time. And they took me to court, and the judge said that the bond that was given was a bond that wasn't within reason. It was prejudiced, and they had to give me a bond that was within reason. The bond that they wound up giving me was called a surety bond. That night, before I went to court, I left off reading where David was saying that the Lord is my surety. And so that same guard, I had him to get me a dictionary to help me understand the full brevity of what surety was, and it meant collateral. And as I was reading it, man, I like, wow, okay, all right. And the next morning, when the judge tells me he's giving me a surety bond, and he says $50,000. So I didn't need money. I just needed a signature. Just needed somebody that had collateral. And my grandmother came, and I got released. And from there, pretty much, I had.
You never end up going back in the promise you made to God that night.
Yes, sir.
Why do you think so many people fall back on their promise?
Well, I think it's just like a person who gambles. Person who gambles, so easy to, after you've actually seen the benefits and you've won so much, say, well, after I hit this amount, I'm done, I'm out. That's what they say. But then turn around and that urge in you will find you going back. 2 Peter 2:22 says, as the sow returns to her own mire, and also the dog returns to his own vomit. And so when the dog returns to his own vomit, it's in the dog's nature. It's in the dog's nature to return to his vomit. It's in the sow's nature to return to the mud. And it's also in human nature to go back to do the wrong thing. But I believe I had been empowered. I believe that God made an investment in me, and that investment is, an endowment, literally. I mean.
Since you've been out, tell me how your life have changed. How have you been able to help the community, and the things tell me some of the things you want to highlight throughout this process.
Highlighting throughout this process to me deals with the fact of knowing that I don't care what your life may have appeared to be. Just like right now, I'm trying to hopefully finish penning a book called My Call is Greater Than My Fall. It's about understanding that no matter how many mistakes we make, that God has a system of recovery. God has a way to restore people, to restore situations even. He said to even restore the years that the cankerworm, the locust, and the caterpillar ate up. And sometimes when we look at a caterpillar or locust, we can only think along terms of crops that have been lost. But if you look at that into a more metaphorical and figurative way, you'll find out that there's a lot of things that we've lost. I remember as a kid, I'm telling you, man, for the years, think about the years that I spent waiting on my mom to be released. And then when she showed up, look at the restoration, look at the time, look like the time was like nothing when I really reflected on that, and that restoration took place. So being able to be where I am now, I can honestly say that being able to go to prisons is so invigorating for me.
How often do you do that, by the way?
I was pretty regular, but now since I've been in this region, certain channels you have to go through to be able to get in, background clearances, all that stuff. And so I haven't been as effective here as I was there. And so that's one thing that I do need to really recapture. Because I look at it like this here. If God delivers you what you've been delivered from, I believe you become a deliverer of. And he will use situations like that in life to make you meet or shall I say something that's viable to help people get out of what they're stuck in. And so whether it's that, a lot of times, like right now, I also would love to establish a foundation called, this one here basically just deals with young people and their influence. The Bible said that children are arrows in the hand of a mighty warrior, but an arrow cannot hit a bullseye without being influenced. And I think that's where the church's role comes into play, and we have to do so much more to influence our youth, our young people, because there's so many other things that are already influencing them. And some of it's going to either be to their detriment or going to push them to a place to where they will ascend. But the key is I think we have to give them the right tools. We have to give them the right stuff. And the other thing is parents. It says train up their children in the way that they should go. Later on, they will not depart from it. The key is it's the it factor that we look at. It's what you indoctrinate, what you give to your children and show to your children at home. You can believe me, you cannot depend on educators at schools to do it. It's something to where they need to bring to the education system, to where teachers actually can learn from our children, learn from their experiences that they brought from home.
What do you think about now society is, in some cases, are pushing an idea of not to kids that, you're not really who you are until you've tried certain things. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts on that is, and I'll go ahead and I'll speak about the vividness of what took place with me first. And that is that was forced on me. You see what I'm saying? As, to be molested and then, and hear my uncle say that I'm going to be that. And then I find men in society who are wearing dresses because they're wrestling with their own identity. It's an identity issue. And the key is what are they going to be able to identify with based on what truth? I'm finding that the Bible is timeless. And if we're going to pull principles from it to be able to help structure a society, you find that most homes, if the woman is leading, then you have 64 to 70% of her being able to move that family into a positive place. But if the father is there and it's a co-op between that man and that woman, then that family succeeds at a rate of 94 to 97%.
So why do you think so many families are broken? What do you think the top two things that keep families apart?
One of those things is the fact that, number one, I believe the man is under attack.
Who's attacking the man?
Well, for me personally, I'm going to always say Satan, and I'm going to say the society as a whole. When you look at right now the war that we're dealing with, there's always a great loss when wars take place, when men execute violence on other men. These wars that take place, they take men, they take young men, old men, they take them. They don't come back. And when they don't come back, you got women, just like when World War I, I think, took place, women normally didn't leave the house. They took care of the house, but the sole provider used to be the man. And all of a sudden, after World War I, you got women who are driving trucks, women who are doing, and so it took the culture and it shifted it somewhat. And when that shift took place, it took a whole lot of things away. I think it was one prophet that prophesied, said there was going to be a great falling away of men. In African American society, we find ourselves at a disparity. Our women, it's 7 women practically to every one man. Because of that, Some women now are with women rather than with the man. And you got other men who are not doing the right thing, and because of it, women have a depiction of us, and some of us they say we're dogs. And I think it's just more or less just knowing the nature of it that brings us down. And I think we have to work harder to deal with number one, knowing that the male is under attack. When Satan wanted to destroy mankind as a whole, all he needed to do was attack one man. And even if he used his woman to attack, he succeeded, in the sense that the fall of man took place in the garden. Next thing you know, the first family, the first murder that takes place in the Bible. Come on, it's
with Cain and Abel.
Yeah, Cain and Abel. So in looking at that breakdown, you'll find out that over and over, as you keep looking through scripture, you'll see consistently how that the male has been targeted. He's been targeted because number one, he has the seed. And the seed, that seed that has to be, he's the progenitor. He's the one who's going to continue to make, of course, he can't do it by himself. The woman is not excluded. And I'm not somebody who's quote, as though it just has to be male dominated. But I believe men do need to take their place. And if men don't take their place, then that's one of the number one things that's going to always keep the whole balance of both our families, our nation, our world in a flux.
So what do you say to people who think like, the reason why things are continuously, like things have always been bad, but it's getting worse?
Mm-hmm.
What do you say to the people that think like it's because of men always being in charge and being dominant?
Right.
That trend's been happening. Like, what do you say to these people?
Well, to those people, the one thing that I think that needs to be realized is that even the men who are in charge, if those men in charge are not governed themselves, then of course you're still going to have a flawed system, because it has to be a system. See, when God made the man and then brought the woman, he gave them dominion. He didn't give it to him first. He gave it to them. The man had a job before the woman was ever existed. And that's the beauty of it. He named the whole creation. He did all of that before the woman ever shows up. And because of that, it's an order that God sets. That's why he says the head of every man is Christ, and then the head of the woman, and then the family. That comes after the fact that he designates that the man has to be the leader.
So with all the influences we have today, society have changed in such a way where a lot of things are acceptable. What is your ideal man today? Like, what do you think his responsibilities should be? And how do you think his life should be structured based on how we're living today? Do you think it's the same, you think that the same principles apply, 20 years, 100 years ago? Or you think we have to change the principle on how a man should live his life?
Well, because of the changes that have taken place, there has to be adjustments. With those adjustments, some people say, well, families can't survive if the man and the woman isn't working, and it's true in some aspects. Just depends on how a man positions himself, though. But yes, it would be nice to see that same utopian type idea actually be able to exist. But culture and all of the shifts that's taking place, we have to adjust. And because of that, I would say that for those that for some reason or another have a problem with society being more male dominated, no, there's going to be men who going to want control, period. That's just that. That's testosterone and flesh and everything else you want to call it that's on display. But the key is if you really want to see a whole man, all you need to do is be able to see who's standing beside him, not behind him, beside him. And if he's got a woman who understands her role and her position standing beside him, then they're always going to be able to balance the scales. right now we see a failure when it comes to the church and societally as it relates to the harmony of marriage. Because, come on, the divorce rate is higher even in the church now than it is in the world. And so because of that, we still have to find our way back to the very thing that actually safeguards us. The only safeguard I've seen that really genuinely can hold a family together is the Bible.
So the divorce rate is, I believe it's over 50%. Today it's a lot easier to get divorced than it was 100 years ago. Or I won't go back that far, but it's the divorce rate is much higher today than it was back then.
Right.
Do you feel like it's the fault in society for making it so easy for a family to separate? Or do you feel like Dan's correct? Like if a family is not, if a woman doesn't feel like her family is where she envisioned it to be, if the man don't feel like the family is where it's supposed to be, they should just have the right to just separate and move forward.
And walk away. Yeah. Well, for me, I believe more than ever that when you, and I'm always kind of coming from more of a biblical perspective, but what I'm seeing societally, that now just dating alone almost sets you up for failure in a sense, because the offer to be able to date and to find out what you got before you get it, per se, always puts you in a compromised position. When in all actuality, I think relationship should be at the top of the order. If the relationships aren't established first, then how do you actually have a whole unit? When people date, I believe that they bring their best, like how I'm dressed today. I'm dressed because I know I'm in an interview. I know that I should look appropriate. In the same manner, if a young man is dating a young lady, or they going on a date, and of course he's going to most likely try and dress himself up pretty good. She's going to do the same. But do they actually get the real, true individual at the table that allows them to be able to know that they have a person who is not manipulative, a person who does not have ill intent? And what happens is a lot of times that's where the trick is being laid, or the trap is being laid. It's being laid because people aren't coming in their true selves. And I believe that that's going to be the one key thing that's going to bring balance to it. So while some people may vent against it or say, well, no, this ain't cool, what I know to be true is that we need to know each other before we know each other. And when I say that, there's the intimacy and sexual activity that takes place between couples and between partners. But why do that if you don't know who you're actually dealing with?
So in our culture, like men and women, they need no permission to become one and to live together, because society have made it where like we're free to do whatever we want. When you look at the Muslim culture, when you look at the Jews, they're very strict on how young men and young women interact. The marriage rate in the Jewish community and in the Muslim community is much higher than it is in our community.
Right.
Do you feel like we should follow those same steps in terms of how a man and a woman should get involved with each other?
Yes, I do. Because if we can reapproach this, then it puts back some of the sacredness that goes with it. Because if you don't hold on to what's sacred, then eventually it becomes sacrilege. And that's the key. We don't want to see our daughters be sacrificed at the hands of, quote, a young man that looked the part, dressed the part, but yet at the same time his intention was ill. I think it was Bob Marley that said that I want to make sure I don't say this the wrong way, but Bob Marley said that basically he compares a man to being a beast, or someone who does not have a common respect when he decides to try and date a young lady to win her affection, win her love, only to end up dropping her or hurting her. So
So, who do you think is tasked with making sure that their daughter or their son is matched with the right partner? Do you think that father or the mother should take that role together? Do you think it's the father's responsibility to make that decision? Or do you think that you've brought up your child in in an environment where you give them the freedom to choose their own partner?
I think the responsibility would lie with the individual, but it should be with guidance. And as long as someone is guiding or governance, shall I say, if someone's governing it, you remember Isaac, well, in scripture, I think Abraham got the wife. He found the wife, but he had specific instruction. It was more divinely inspired. We can say that because he prayed and he got some specifics on what to look for, what to go after. And I think in the same manner, imagine if we as parents took this same approach, then I think that we'd feel much better knowing that our decision was guided by God.
What kind of guidance would you give a young lady in terms of the best qualified partner to get?
Well, my advice, number one, is to first be able to know who she has across the table from her. If she does, see, I'd like to see myself personally is what I try and even tell my daughters, no matter what, is have you actually tapped into the side of this person that's pursuing you to where they've gave you their genuine self. If it's not genuine, you're not going to be able to, number one, move too much further forward with them.
But how does she know this person is actually telling her what actually is?
Well, that's the thing, because it's very, one thing about society is it's very, shall I say, layered. And with all these layers, you have to be able to deal with that onion type effect to get to the core of the person. So what I suggest is that if they're gonna try and go through knowing a person, make sure they can actually tap into what I would call the uglier side to them, the side to them that's raw and uncut. How often are you going to see new couples come to a table and they're there to eat, or they're going to go to a club or wherever they're going out to their date, but the person just freely uses flatulence or uses foul language or whatever? How did they respond when they came to your house to introduce themselves to your parents? All of these things are going to be necessary because your people definitely need to be able to see them and be able to discern something about them and about their characters that's going to at least help you then to be able to be more receptive, even though it can be a unique individual. Man, that guy was pretty weird. And that's what we could say. But no matter about the weird effect of them, I can speak for myself. I got one of my son-in-laws. He asked to take our daughter out on a date, and my daughter said, "Well, Dad, I wanted to know if I can go out or whatever." But the one key thing that I didn't have to tell her this, but you know, in my mind, I'm saying if he doesn't come here and ask, then you're not going with him. I already had that programmed in me, and so he came. And he came in a respectful manner, and he demonstrated a sense to me that he also would be able to help safeguard her. He'd be able to protect her. And because I felt that protection in him, I felt that he was also a responsible young man because he was already holding down a job. And then I just started doing my research, and I found out that his dad was a hard worker, and his mother. And when I found these things out, then I felt safer. So I gave her permission. You know, by the time they're 17 and a half, they're saying, "We want to get married." I'm like, that's a little too early, but my daughter responded to me in a way to where she told me, she said, well, Dad, it's either do it the biblical way or either eventually, I'm going to end up stepping off of the ledge. I'm going to do something. I said, yeah, well, the scripture says it's better to marry than to burn. But at the same time, like I told her, it ain't better to marry if you're going to turn around and sign up for misery. So, in that, we came to a conclusion before it was up. They were actually in the same birthing ward just in different places. I mean, no, in the same hospital, in the same room, being born. She just was born one day before him. So, but they got married, and they've been married for now, going to be 23 years this year.
So when we look at society and how you were brought up with your uncles, being able to get away with a lot of things, and we look at society today with social media, and we're able to just put out a lot of things.
Right.
Like, have we gotten better as a society in terms of like the mentality of people? Because it's like today, the average person, I've probably seen more naked people,
right,
women, than a man 50 years ago, his entire life, maybe in 1 year, right, or in 1 month, because it's so easy to, with all this distraction, it's like there's not much goods coming out of it.
Right.
And when you look at back then, we didn't have the ability to get online and see all those things, but you're around so many people with, right, that could influence you in such negative ways, whether it's via drugs or violence.
Right.
Where's that middle where, like, we could have like a safer, more technological era where we're going down the right path?
Right. Right now, what I'm finding is that, we are actually in one of the biggest errors to me and I pray that this don't sound too dogmatic, but era of idolatry. And when I speak of idolatry, it's knowing that people are more engrossed with the image of me, I. Like they say, there's no I in team. But at the same time, you hear one of famous comments of Kobe Bryant say, well, I'm in that MFer. And when he makes that statement, he's saying that whether the team is a team or not, he's saying, look, I'm going to make my mark, and I'm going to be known for the mark I make. And so it's an I that keeps being introduced. I believe that when you look at it, it's becoming more desensitized. Why is it that a woman now can actually be without at least a robe or a shawl or something over her? I went down on Miami Beach, and everybody's got G-strings and whatever down their backs, and so that's what we now have been inundated with culturally. And so it's going to be some people who are still going to wear dresses that go past their knees, but they're going to be some. Sorry, they're just going to come with it all hanging out. And if we don't figure out how to find that balance to where, like, our daughters actually have our daughters to realize that, look, it's some things to do in society, but it's some things that, look, it brings shame to us. So like Will Smith slapping Chris Rock. Some people may not be affected by it in the way that's proper, but the key is we as a people were affected by it. We were. As a black people, no matter what, what I'm saying is this. There's another thing that I'm hoping to give birth to, and it's called Tubu, and that is to us, by us. It's the assaults, it's the crimes, it's the things that we are doing to each other, black on black crime. When a man can talk my daughter into getting in a video, and whether he's paying her money or paying her nothing, and she taking all her clothes off, that's a crime to me against my child or against my sister or against, and maybe one man may not see it quite the way I do, but I just look at it like we got to make sure that we learn to protect each other better.
So in the case of Will Smith and Chris Rock, like how do you think that affected the community, and how would you see the best way for them to have dealt with that situation?
The best way they have dealt with it, I think, firstly and foremost, well, when I kind of analyzed it, I saw Will laughing at the joke, but then when he looked to Jada and Jada wasn't laughing, that created the response, and because of that, we move into the slap. But the key is that if he was okay with it at first, and then by that response, you know as well as I do that we as men, we're going to try and protect our woman. And in that, how much credibility did he lose? How much credibility did we lose?
Do you think we lost credibility by Chris Rock not bringing criminal charges towards him? By him saying, hey, he'll let it slide, that actually makes our community worse, where people could think we could react in whichever way because of our feelings and let the law deal with it, and that's the best way to move forward.
I say this here, that one option of letting the law do what it does is one option. The other one, though, is that in taking in retrospect and looking at it, this man, Chris, has been publicly demeaned. He'd been bulldozed, and so there's a side of it to where everybody's saying, they give him his kudos for being a professional. Right, he still did his job, but how does he feel behind the scenes? Because behind the scenes, I'd much rather be able to know that I didn't have to go public with the fact that I got raped. Publicly, he got raped, no matter what. It's just something that he doesn't get to escape. It's gonna visit him over and over again. I'm hearing these guys and I'm seeing these memes and these jokes that everybody's putting up. But what is it doing for us as a people? It's still taking us down.
So knowing what you know now, what kind of message you'd like to leave in terms of bringing our community together and how we move forward in growing and changing the image that we've put out there of being so, so...
Anti?
Yes.
One thing you'll find is that, to me, the growth of our community is based on us having a willingness to grow us. We gotta invest back into each other. It's important. Not that whatever the government subsidized, that's one thing, okay? That's just a little extra topping to put on it, but it's what we do to us, what we do for us, how often do we patronize our own, and this does not necessarily have to be just a pro-black message, but it's a message that proves consistently that because of what we have gone through as a people over 100+ years ago, and then 500 that you can add to that, another 4 that you can add to it as it relates to how we've been demeaned, how we've been taken to a place that has not left a lot of value on us. Sometimes, how many times have we heard our kids not say, well, ain't no way I could go to Harvard. Why not? Ain't no way I could be a doctor or a lawyer. Why not? And if we don't at least promote belief, indoctrinate them to believe that anything is possible, they're going to buy into what society's saying. And so we have to invest in ourselves. We have to support each other. And not only on so many levels, when you think about the LGBT community and what their agenda may be. Look, I got LGBT community, family. I got family. But does my message change as it relates to the gospel of Jesus Christ? It doesn't. Because either they're gonna either do something different with their lives, or according to the Bible, said the wages of sin is death. The Bible clearly says it. It's not my words, it's not my judgment that I'm throwing out there. It's a matter of finding out now how to break some of the cycles. But as long as it's being promoted, if they're now trying to share this with, come on, our young children, our little ones, and tell them it's okay. How is it that a couple who is actually whole and they've been with each other over a number of years and proven that they have a good track record as a family, and they would be denied the right to adopt a child, and they give the right to adopt a child to a man and another man who's married?
So when you look at the inner cities, you see that a lot of children doesn't have a good male role model.
Right.
They grew up in the streets, and in a lot of cases, the streets consume them. Do you think that an opportunity for a child in that situation to get adopted to a stable environment where you have two men or two women who are financially able to take that child out of poverty and put them in a situation where they have everything that they would need plus more to grow up to excel? Do you think that's a bad idea?
I'll tell you what doesn't make it a bad idea is the fact that you know that the child and the child's safety and its well-being is going to be secure, because they can offer all of that. But the lifestyle part of it is still going to be something that's going to automatically put a child. Well, I'll say this. I think that for the protection of societally, that if someone makes a choice, that's their choice. And so by them making that choice, it can either protect that child and cause that child to be able to be more compassionate on either side. See, that's what mom and mom do, but that's not me. It's still about them being able to make that choice, but it sure softens the blow if they decide to lean towards what they've seen in the adoptive parents.
So what do you say to people who have the mindset that this is how I was born, this is who I am, feel trapped in this identity that I have? What do you think the issue there is, or if that's even an issue?
I think one thing that I'm seeing pretty consistently is if a child, there's impressionable ages. I remember dealing with psychology 101, 102, 102, whatever, 202. But in that, like Freud, I think he said, we all are the product of our environment. And I believe that if you put a male child in an environment that is without a male in it, and at the time of the impressionable stages, to where they have no other example that they're seeing except feminine examples, what you gonna eventually produce? I just think that they'll gravitate to some of that. To say that someone's born like that, like I say, I got family members, and there was something that I seen very unique. Some people say, well, sometimes generational curses, they can use all these phrases. But what I'll say is this, is I know that I got raped at 6 or 7 years old. I got a family member that at the same age got this same thing happen. And his lifestyle is one where he wears hair like women, nails like women, dresses like women. And I can't say that he was born like that, because I know him. And because I know him and have dealt with him on multiple levels, the one key thing that I have seen is that when he was in an impressionable age, he did what boys would do. But being left in the environment that he was in, eventually he adapted to that environment because there was no male there.
At what point of your life did you forgive, or have you forgiven the person who did that to you?
Amazingly, you know what happened? When I got ordained as a minister, and we were living in Fort Myers, I was getting ready to leave Fort Myers and move away. And I prayed a prayer, and I said, God, I want you to just close up all the loose ends that I may have here. If there's any issues with anybody, please help me to resolve them. The next day, the gentleman that raped me as a little boy walked up and called me by name. He said, hey, Tyrone. He said, I was wondering if you could help me out. He said, I need something to eat, and it costs like $8 for me to be able to stay the night at Salvation Army. I said, yeah, I can do that. You know, so I immediately gave the yes to it. I said, just give me a minute. I'm going to go inside and get you a plate of food. But when I went inside to get the plate of food, it was there that I had my greatest fight. Because then I started hearing myself say to me, ain't you still gonna get him? Aren't you gonna handle that? And I went to the kitchen drawer, pulled a drawer out, and I grabbed one of the kitchen knives, about an 8-inch butcher knife, and I turned it upside down in my shirt. And I got ready to go back outside. And when I started going back outside, that's when I believe I heard the voice of God say, now you gonna serve you or you gonna serve me? And I was able to put the knife up, took him the plate, took him the food, and he said, thank you. I said, you're welcome. And he proceeded to get ready to walk off, and I said, hold on. I said, I do have a question for you. I said, do you remember? He said, remember what, Tyrone? Remember what? I said, remember what you did to me. He said, no, I don't. What? Remember doing what to you? I said, do me a favor. I said, don't do that. I said, because that would warrant something else. I said, so don't do that. I said, you ain't got to lie about this. I said, now is the time to fix it, if it's gonna get fixed. Long story short, he said, well, I really don't know what you're talking about. I said, so you don't remember? I said, okay. I said, if you don't remember, I said, okay then. All right, well, you have a nice day. And then I told him, I said, well, look, I say, one thing I want you to know. I say, if any man has a fault or an ought with somebody, Scripture says to leave his gift at the altar, to go back and get it right with his brother, and then come back and offer to me what you will. And that was God's statement. I told him. He said, all right. I said, so do you know the Lord Jesus? Have you been saved yet? He said, well, not really, like that. And he said, but I'm going to go ahead and go. So he was ready to go quickly then. But I turned and got ready to walk in the house. And as I got to the door, I heard a loud holler, scream, or whatever you want to call it. He was just crying out really loud. So I turned and went back. And he met me. And he said, look, he said, I remember, and I know what I did. He said, and I just want to apologize. I'm sorry. And he said, man, just tell me, what must I do to be saved? Will the Lord help me in this? And right then and there is where, I was able to lead the person that victimized me and led him to victory. So he accepted Christ as Savior and Lord. And all I can hope and believe is that he was sincere.
Do you think you're part of the problem by not calling law enforcement and have him pay his debt to society for what he did to you?
At one point, yes, I wrestled with that. But the only thing was, I said, well, what are the statute of limitations for something like this? I'm in my 50s. I said, me reporting it What is he going to do? But at the same time, I also wrestled with knowing that I'm the problem, because if I had said something when I was a child, how many other children in that same neighborhood, like I was, that didn't have toys, did he get to?
Do you think a person like that can be cured or saved? Do you think once you've gone down the path where you're doing things like that to children, do you think there's a way out with God?
I do. I don't think there's a closed door to mercy. I don't think there's a closed door to the love of God. According to Romans 8:35 says, it lets us know that, who or what can separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ. Height, depth, persecution, famine, all of these things. Saying none of these things, that you won't be in a position to be separated. So I believe that if a man genuinely repents of his sins, then God will save him.
In closing, what would you like to leave us with, and where can we get a hold of you?
Well, I'd like to leave you with the thought of knowing that God can. If you put your trust in men, they're going to fail you. And one guy said, well, that ain't good for business, Rev. I said, well, it ain't about it being good for business. But what I'm saying is a lot of people, because they put us as pastors on platforms, priests on platforms, and then found themselves being violated by them. I just want you to know that all of us are human first. We're men first. Because we're men first, the divine connection to God and what God endows men and women of God with is imperative. That you understand that at some point, we as men will let you down, but God won't. He said he'll never leave you. He'll never forsake you. He'll be with you even unto the ends of the world. And so knowing that, it's an opportunity for you to just put your trust in God. And by doing that, I guarantee you'll be a whole lot better.
How can people get a hold of you, and where could we get more of you in the future?
Well, my name again is Tyrone Ferrell, Pastor Tyrone Ferrell. Sometimes people can find me on YouTube. There's videos where I preach and deliver messages in that way. Also, COTHM, Cotham, which is the acronym for this church, Circumcision of the Heart Ministries. And by just pulling that up on Facebook, you'll find that there's several things that are out there. We got radio broadcasts, different blogs that we do. But what I really love to do is more of this, where it's a conversation. If we can have a conversation, I believe, a lot of times you can find the real true essence of a person just by being able to just have a talk with them. And so as we continue to endeavor to get the gospel of Jesus Christ out, I hope you'll join us on the journey. Pray with us, support us, stand with us as we try and stand with the rest of our society.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
All right.